record when
Yep.
when
So
Scott starts speaking.
Recording has started, and if we could just start letting people in from the lobby, then I can just ask people to bear with us while we wait to start.
Over to you, Scott.
Thanks everyone for those that joined us early. Obviously, you're joining the Navigating the Future of Finance webinar series. We'll get going on the hour at 1 o'clock. So you still have time to grab that lunchtime cup of coffee or cup of tea as you need. So we'll get going on the hour. People continuing to join, which is great. We'll aim in for a 1 o'clock start, so everybody's aware. Hopefully everybody should be on mute, but if you do see you're unmuted, please do go on mute, and we can make sure that everybody can hear us loud and clear. Just give it a couple more minutes, everyone. Okay, last 30 seconds for everybody. If you need to grab that final sandwich or boil that kettle, we'll get going in about 30 to 40 seconds. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We have to start at the top of the hour because we have a packed agenda. So welcome to the Robert Half Protiviti series of Navigating the Future of Finance, a series, a three-stage series for this edition. It's a joint series hosted by Protiviti and Robert Half. Protiviti and Robert Half are sister companies, all one company. Robert Half is the global recruitment organisation, but works very closely with the management consulting arm that is Protiviti. And together we provide a broad range of services across industries, in particular with a deep expertise and a long tenured experience in the accounting and finance area of our clients. So together, Protiviti can provide very mature and sophisticated management consulting solutions, propositions and methodologies, and then can tap into the Robert Half network of expertise and talent. And on the flip side, our Robert Half services can not only provide talent solutions, but also draw down on the Protiviti methodologies and approaches and solutions. So together we form a pretty powerful global proposition for our clients. Focus on this series, and the reason why we felt this series was very relevant today is the environment that all of our clients and yourselves are operating in. So very much this is about looking forward and navigating that changing future. Listening to our clients at the moment, the theme we're hearing very much in the finance space is doing more with less. I don't think anybody would suggest that's particularly new, but I think it's particularly relevant with the current economic and global conditions that we're all adapting to. But also, frankly, as finance leaders, we're having to continue to deal with that change in regulation. We're having to deal with the continuing stakeholder expectations, particularly around analysis and insights and forward thinking that we're all expected to deliver, but also at the same time, retain top talent and bring in top talent to enhance that capability. So a moving target and an environment that we're continuing to operate in. So this series really is about providing you with perspectives and insights into all of those challenges. And we're going to start today with building a resilient or running a resilient function that we'll come on to in a second. But more importantly, as I said, the series runs throughout the coming months, and Clive Davis will have a focus around people as the most valuable asset. And then in November, we'll look a little bit on the automation side of running an effective finance operation. But today, very much the focus is on building that resilient function. I'm really pleased to have Michael Melrose join me from Protiviti, one of our directors. Michael Melrose leads our finance transformation practice here in the UK market. And I'll hand over to Michael at this stage. What I will say, though, before we get into it, we are going to use technology today. So we're going to use the Menti platform to both poll you and get your input into this session. And there'll be an opportunity right at the end to ask questions if we have time. And if not, we'll try and capture written questions and respond to you separately and individually. So really welcome your input through that Menti platform. So Michael, over to you.
All right, thanks, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As Scott mentioned, today we're going to talk about resiliency for finance teams. And so what does resiliency mean for my team? How do I identify and prioritize activities that I need to create change with to build that more resilient team? And then what are the levers that I can pull to mature and move my team forward? And as Scott mentioned, we wanted to start with a Menti poll just to get a read of the room. So if you have not used Menti in the past, it's pretty straightforward. If you use your mobile or a web browser, navigate to www.menti.com. There's a code on your screen. If you enter that code, you will see our first polling question. So we'll give folks a couple seconds to do that. Again, you can do it from your mobile or your computer. Log on to Menti and then enter that code, the 8-digit code that you see on your screen. And once you enter that code, you'll see our first polling question, which is, what is your biggest risk related to resiliency? And so you'll see a few choices there. And so while you're answering that poll question, let me talk about what we're seeing at Protiviti. And again, if you've missed the details on how to log into Menti, it's at the bottom of the next slide. So the last few years have certainly tested the resiliency of finance teams. Finance leaders have been challenged to respond to many, many challenges: widespread labor shortages, outdated and inefficient supply chain models, Russia's war on Ukraine, interest rate volatility, rising inflation, and the results of Protiviti's Top 2023 Risks survey highlight that finance leaders have also identified several top risks that relate to resiliency. Things like the ability to attract and retain top talent, economic conditions, increases in the labor market costs, uncertainty around the supply chain ecosystem, the ability to respond to an unexpected crisis. All of those things are top of mind for finance leaders. So with that in the kind of greater context of Protiviti's survey, let's take a pause and jump back to our results from our first poll. So I'll toss it over to you, Scott, to see what we're seeing in the room.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We actually expected quite a balanced perspective across these challenge areas, because all of them in some way relate to a challenge that was reflected in the survey that Michael just talked you through. But actually, really encouragingly for me, we are still seeing finance operations and functions having to both not only maintain their resilience and create resilience, but also be able to grow and scale with the ambitions of the business. So that's both positive, but also a huge challenge. And in terms of adopting new ways of working, building capability, adapting new technologies and innovative approaches, those are really some of the levers you can pull in building that scale and that growth. So really fascinating, really interesting, and we'll touch on some of those challenges, I think, coming up, Michael, won't we? So thank you for the input on that. Really, really fascinating, but also quite positive.
Certainly. And when we talk with finance teams about resiliency, our clients want to know a few things. So how can they continue to serve the business in the event of some sort of significant business disruption or in the event of unexpected turnover in the team? And then how do we scale our team without adding additional full-time employees, which is clearly reflected in the results here of the ability to scale and grow the business. And we'll share some insights on both those topics today. And the pandemic has really taught us a lot of lessons. We really need to be prepared for unprecedented challenges and change. I recently read an interesting quote from Apple's CEO Tim Cook, who called out resiliency on an earnings call related to the pandemic. And he said that he identified resilient, high-functioning teams as the key element that fortified the company's success during the global pandemics. Significant change will always be present, and those resilient, prepared teams are the ones that are going to be able to thrive in those times of change. So with that, let's jump back to another poll question. So if you navigate back to Mentee, you'll see our next polling question, and that is, what's the biggest challenge to driving change? So certainly I think most of us, or if not all of us, can agree that change is good and that we need to mature our organizations, but it's hard. And so curious to see what the biggest challenge is for your organizations when it comes to driving change. And when we start to think about building that resilient team and creating a team that's open to change, it's really just a matter of getting started. But that, of course, can be one of the biggest challenges for teams. And when we speak with our clients, they often don't know where to start. There's often a strong desire to change. Teams are so busy with their business as usual operations, just struggling to keep up with daily operations, that they can't find time to make change. And we also see multiple change initiatives that will get started, get some momentum, but then they're never finished. We also often see clients that are implementing new tools or new technology, but they're not optimizing those tools or transforming the processes around those tools. And so they're not really seeing the change that they would like. So for example, we'll see clients that implement a new automation reconciliation tool, some really strong tools out there like Cadency and Blackline that can really increase automation and create a lot of value. But we often see clients after they implement those tools still doing recs in Excel. And so they're not optimizing those tools and really getting the value out of them. So with that, I'll pause and Scott, let's see the results from our second poll.
Oh, looks like we're having some technical challenges on the poll results.
All right. Well, we're waiting for those to load. Oh, we got a few answers here.
Got a few. And interesting, I think, Michael, already a strong theme towards that lack of resources. And for me, lack of resources, implies a volume challenge. I think it's actually about capability, and I think that's probably what people mean here. It's about having the right capabilities, both within the BAU team, but also to draw down on from third parties or from external hires. And I think, given that bringing that right capability at the right time to drive effective change and drive value is hugely important and a big challenge. And I think the two peaks, if you like, sit together, right? It's that lack of time and that lack of focus to be able to get organized around those additional resources and those additional people. And again, I'm not surprised by those challenges, and those are certainly reflective of the client conversations that we're having as well. But certainly getting organized and having some time, I think you're gonna address some of those challenges in the next slide.
Yeah, certainly. And what we see with our clients who are successful at creating change, it really starts with that tone at the top. And they're really intentional about setting the foundation for change. And that starts with getting the right people involved. Those with knowledge of how the business works today, those with knowledge of best practices and how the business needs to work in the future. And then maybe most importantly, those who have strong influence within the organization. Clients who are successful at creating change are very deliberate about creating time and the headspace for change. And again, this can be very challenging for teams that are running at capacity with their normal BAU operations and constant requests from other areas of the business. The next thing that we see from successful teams is documenting a prioritized list of what they want to accomplish. And those priorities that are most viable are the ones that are aligned the closest with the greater business goals. So thinking through what goals do you want to accomplish with the change? And conversely, if you don't change, what goals won't you be able to accomplish? And we see clients often struggling to create that prioritized list, and it's often helpful to consider an approach like design thinking to help generate those ideas on which priorities we should focus on.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there, Michael, is particularly around the prioritization, and hey, and apologies, we're going to take questions right at the very end. But in terms of that prioritized list, it's very important to use techniques and methods to generate consensus around the organization, both internally within finance and more broadly around the organization, because it's important that everybody's on the same page. It's not finance's prioritized list. It's got to be the business's prioritized list. I think that's fair to say, Michael, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that also goes back to that influence and having somebody that can help drive that consensus across the organization. It's often very helpful to focus on achievable targets that add incremental value. So, for example, we see many clients who may want a new ERP system that they think is going to solve all of their problems, but that's not realistic for many of our clients. So we advise them to focus on smaller bits of automation that are fast to implement and deliver quick value right away. And that not only helps the business move forward quickly, but it also builds that positive tone and momentum around transformation within the organization. And then the final step in kind of promoting this vision of change is looking at what delivery approach is going to help the organization and the team succeed. So if we flip to the next slide, resilient organizations are using a lot of different approaches to help drive innovation and get those desired results. And so you can see the results of Protiviti's recent global technology survey. We asked respondents we asked them about their top approaches to help drive innovation, and you can see that two-thirds of our respondents are turning to Agile. Again, we talked about that small bits of value that's realized right away to help get others around the change initiative. Similar to our previous ERP example, stakeholders may struggle to find value and support for a multi-year ERP implementation where they can get around small pieces of automation and the value that can generate. We also see that resilient teams are able to quickly change and embrace an agile approach. That's going to help you quickly quickly pivot your transformation efforts, to align with the changing environment. So, for example, your entire team now needs to work remotely for several months or several years, as we saw in the pandemic. Things can change quickly, and so not getting too far ahead of yourself and adopting that more agile approach can really help drive the momentum forward and make sure that your transformation and change initiatives are aligned with where the business is going. The survey also highlights that more than half of the respondents are employing design thinking, and we previously talked about that. It's a great tool to help identify and prioritize where teams want to change. So, we've taken a quick look at the foundation of change and how to prioritize. So let's look at another lever that we can pull when we're thinking about resiliency within our teams, and that's technology. So navigate back to Mentee. We've got another poll that we're interested in your thoughts on. And that poll is, which of the following technologies does your team use? So you can see the choices there. Again, navigate back to Mentee. We'll give you a minute to respond to the question, which of the following technologies does your team use?
All I'll add is, we just go back to the slide a second, Beth, is with that, I'm very conscious that if we put a slide like this up in a group of finance leaders such as yourselves, then I suspect the very strong focus, we wouldn't have put a slide up like this. But I think the technologies and the awareness of the use of technology and the opportunity around technology, particularly the finance function, is much more mature nowadays. So we're genuinely interested to see the results here.
That's right, Scott. And, we generally see an underinvestment in technology among our clients. Legacy ERPs or no ERP at all. A lot of internally developed applications, heavily reliance on Excel. Individuals who have been with the business for 20 plus years who have this legacy knowledge that's not documented anywhere. And those situations can pose some serious resiliency risks to finance teams. It forces teams to execute a lot of manual tasks versus strategic tasks. So they're moving data, formatting data, cleansing data, rather than focusing more on that analysis and forward-looking activities. These manual Excel-based activities are prone to error due to the manual nature. more likely to crash. I think we've all had that experience of the huge spreadsheet that we've been working on for hours and it suddenly crashes and we lose all this work that we've done. It's often difficult for new employees to learn how to execute their role if there's all this legacy knowledge that is not documented, and also just plainly more difficult to scale. So we see a lot of our small and mid-sized clients that have really large AP or AR teams, and that's because as the business is growing, rather than investing in technology, they're adding more people. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to scale.
Yeah, and I'd add to that as well. I think there's an underlying theme there that technology is one of the levers, as you said, Michael. But I think something to think about is that talent retention point. Yes, it's about adding more people and being able to support the scalability through people. That is an option, right? But retaining those individuals, retaining that knowledge within the business, that talent retention I referenced at the very start, that's very hard in an environment where the activities are very manual in nature, very repetitive in nature. That isn't an inspiring workplace to be in. I think a lot of our clients, particularly those high growth clients, and clearly organizations on the call today that have ambitions around scale and growth, then that talent retention, being able to give individuals, challenging and valuable roles is really key. And it's really hard to do that in a very manually driven environment. It's not only a resiliency challenge, but there's also a people challenge there as well.
Yeah, Scott, with that, let's take a look at our latest poll question.
Yeah, so again, really interesting. Cloud, I think we've seen the growth of or the adoption of cloud technology and the leveraging of cloud solutions in a lot of our clients over the last 5 to 6 years. Again, cloud was a solution that there was a trust element to it at the very start, but now clearly it's seen as an accelerator. It's seen as a core part of most business practices to leverage that as a solution. So that doesn't surprise me, particularly as a lot of the ERP platform solutions out there are forcibly transitioning into cloud products, as we're all very aware of. But I guess really quite interested in the low adoption around some of, particularly robotics. Again, it's not a new concept. Automation, again, it's a technology that's much more accessible nowadays, and one we're seeing adopted, particularly in those more transactional parts of finances, APAR, as Michael referenced. So a little bit surprised to see that so low down the league table. Really fascinating to see the adoption of AI and machine learning. I think that's a growing area and a really fascinating area. And having that applied in finance and helping finance organizations to be much more forward-looking and insightful for their internal stakeholders is a real area of interest for us as well. So really encouraged to see that. And I think none of the above is a really interesting challenge. That's about education and about understanding the constraints and where the business is going, because I think at the moment finance, for many different reasons, technology is certainly needs to be one of those levers that everybody's pulling. So some surprises there, but also cloud certainly not surprised, Michael, from my perspective. That would align with both what we see but also what our technology partners are offering to the marketplace, frankly.
Yeah, and those results align with Protiviti's global technology survey. Cloud was listed as the most popular technology among respondents, and you can see the results in the next slide of that survey. And cloud technology is really driving resiliency because of its distributed nature. So rather than running all of your applications on a single platform, those cloud applications are quicker to detect and mitigate any sort of infrastructure issues. Another technology that we see frequently is no code, low code, and that's used by a third of the respondents from the survey. And it's also on the radar for many people. If you're not familiar with that technology, it's a development platform similar to, or for example, Microsoft Power Platform, and it's used to quickly automate processes or create apps. And it rather than using complex traditional programming language, it has more of a graphic interface, and so it's a little bit easier for users to use and quicker to develop and deploy new technology. Our survey also shows that half of the respondents are currently using AI and machine learning, and the primary use case that we see there within finance is FP&A and specifically around forecasting. Our clients who are a little bit more mature in their technology journeys focus on a few key things. One, technology that's fast to deploy. And so we talked a little bit about that before. So what do we mean by technology fast to deploy? So an example would be, there's accounts payable applications out there that can scan invoices via OCR, execute the three-way match, route for approval, and some of those technologies and tools can be deployed in a matter of days versus months. Another low code, no code example that we often hear about is that people want to wait until a new ERP system is going to be implemented if they have a pending ERP, and those new ERPs can often take several years or often delayed, and so using this low code, no code is a quick way to take an interim step to quickly solve a problem while you're waiting for that longer term fix. We had an example of a client where they had a highly manual purchase order process, and their purchase orders were issued manually, routed manually, tracked in Excel. They had a pending ERP upgrade, and that included the purchase of a new AP module. But rather than waiting several months for that new AP module, we worked with them to build some automation within Microsoft Power Platform to automate that PO process and eliminate the reliance on Excel. We were able to design and deploy that within 2 weeks. And again, that focus on quick incremental value. Another bit of technology that continues to be top of mind, robotics. So Scott talked a little bit about that before. You can see a quarter of our respondents are currently using robotics. On the next slide, we've got some great insights from Gartner, where they looked at some of the statistics around automation. Almost 90% of general accounting operations can be automated. And if we look at that cost of automation, it's usually around a third of the cost of an offshore resource or a fifth of the cost of an onshore resource. And what we're seeing, if we step back from a finance automation perspective, is we're seeing technology that's evolving from working on the simple individual tasks to more full end-to-end process automation. And as Scott mentioned when we kicked off today, our colleague Harrison Jardine, who leads our intelligent automation solution here in the UK, he's going to be presenting in this series, further diving into how to maximize the use of data and automation to drive transformation. So again, if we step back and think about building resiliency, technology is one of those key levers that we can pull. It allows the business to scale without adding additional headcount and frees up teams again to focus on more strategic, value-added, forward-looking tasks. All right. It looks like we're running a little bit short on time. So Scott, do we want to move on to Q&A from here?
No, I think let's try and cover off the final topic, Michael.
Okay,
and then
great.
We can take Q&A offline. And obviously, we've got the next 2 episodes in the series where we could continue to canvass questions. So I think it'd be great if we could just move through the last subject.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we've got one final mentee poll. The final resiliency lever that we wanted to discuss today is people. And so please navigate back to mentee. And we've got one final question for this afternoon. Which of the following people-related issues has the biggest impact on your team? Again, those issues around continuity of team members, unexpected turnover, all of those pose, really big risks to an organization.
And I think we'll all recognise we see a changing market out there. Working closely with our Robert Half colleagues who are very much in the recruitment market, we're all very aware that it was a candidates market last year, both on a permanent and an interim basis. The sourcing the right talent was incredibly difficult. And now suddenly, in a very short period of time, we're actually in a market where there's a shortness of roles, and therefore there's the opportunity there's people are back in the marketplace again, and it'd be great, having people reflect on that point. So it's been a time of rapid change in a really changing world. So that's really interesting for us to observe and experience.
Yeah, Scott, as we're waiting for those poll results to come in, let's take a look at Protiviti's Global Finance Trend Survey again. We can see the top risks related to people that are areas of concern for the finance organization. So things like rising costs of wages, ability to retain people, recruiting qualified candidates, what impact does a hybrid or remote model have on the culture of an organization? Again, all of these things pose a risk to the resiliency, as turnover can create a huge disruption for a team. And then let's take a final look at the results from the last mentee question. So as we're waiting for those to come in, just wanted to highlight a few things that we're seeing in the market about how teams are responding to some of these people-related issues. So, things like reviewing overall benefits, creating flexible work arrangements, trying to tailor individual career growth and career plans to team members, things like upskilling, looking at compensation. All of those things are really trying to address some of the people-related issues, again, trying to mitigate the risk of turnover and making sure that our team members have the right skills at the right time.
Yeah, and really interesting, and no surprises on the survey results so far. The ability to recruit qualified candidates is coming out strong, and I think those are challenges posed by geography, the work environment. We're seeing a much more sophisticated candidates and individuals at very early stages of their career, post qualification, that are looking for culture. They're looking for organisations that have a role in society and the community. So being very attractive as an employer is hugely important, and clearly they're looking for ongoing professional support and development. But just to build on some of the other points we've alluded to today, they're looking for that ability to grow their skills and capabilities. And so in the finance community in particular, the finance professionals are looking to build on those analytical skills. They're looking to build on automation skills. These are very technology savvy individuals in the marketplace, and they want to build on that technology experience and those technology skills. So it's something we have to be very aware of as employers. Frankly and selfishly, I have the same challenge within the consultant industry. So it's the ability to attract the right people. So not surprising results, but good to see as well. So thank you.
So that's all that we had, Scott, in the presentation. So if you want to wrap it up for us, please.
Very happy to. So bang on time, Michael. So thank you very much for that. Look, thank you so much. I wanted to get all the content in rather than open up for questions. I think I'd like some feedback on that as well, if you can, and you're happy to. Do we do a few more Q&A questions at the next session? So looking for feedback on that. But the content was super important, I felt, today. We'll share the content and obviously the results of the surveys. I think we can do that. Before you all go, I will signpost the next session, which is on Thursday, the 12th of October at 1 p.m. with Clive Davis, an executive from the Robert Half side of our business, who's also been on the call today. And he'll be sharing some thoughts and insights into people being, as I think we've alluded to today, the most valuable asset we have, and what are some of the challenges and the opportunities to look after that asset that we have. So really appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully this short, sharp insight over lunch works for everybody's diaries. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to the 12th of October, where I'll be hosting with you again and with Clive. And have a great afternoon, everyone, and see you at the next session.